Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Resilient. Highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Hey guys, Jared Moon here, and welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. Pretty cool episode we have for you today. We're talking to Tim Crockett, and you can check out his website at tamethecraken.org. He is doing some really cool stuff for a really good cause. And so I'm actually just going to read this little excerpt from his website. You guys can check it out. You can donate, do whatever you would like. I highly encourage you to support what Tim is doing. So let me just read this from his site, and then we'll get into the show. And so Tim is going to be rowing a 23-foot boat called the Kraken across the Atlantic Ocean. And I'm going to read now what he wrote. He said, "I'm doing this for a very good reason. As a holder of both American and British passports and being a Special Forces veteran, I am painfully aware that many US and UK soldiers are struggling with depression, anxiety, alienation, and thoughts of suicide brought on by PTSD. The journey I face is my way to raise awareness, educate, and to start connecting those who need help with those that are there to provide assistance. My pending journey is to take part in the 2018 Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge, a race of more than 3,000 nautical miles from the Canary Islands to Antigua across the Atlantic Ocean, considered by some to be one of the toughest challenges on Earth. To put it into perspective, more people have scaled Everest or have journeyed into space than have rowed across the Atlantic. Even fewer have rowed it solo. While I'll be alone in the Atlantic, I need your help to get me there, and by doing so, you'll be helping many others tame their own personal Kraken. Now, as a veteran myself, and if you have served or know someone has, then you probably have been hit or impacted some way. You know somebody who has PTSD, or who has actually really, really struggled with it. Maybe taken their own life. Maybe you know someone specifically. Maybe you just heard of it. But I can tell you from my perspective and from my background, it is a real problem. And if you can help, this is a great place to do it. This is a great guy with an incredible background. So if you can support, please do. He has an awesome story. He's had his hands in a lot of cool different things, and this is an incredible journey he's about to go on. So really, as we dive into this conversation, just think about, where he's been, what he's doing, and why he's doing it, and really just hear more about the story. It's pretty fascinating to take on such an incredible physical feat. That's all I got. Let's dive into
All
the
right,
episode.
Tim, welcome to the Better Humanology podcast, man. I'm glad to have you on today.
Glad to be here.
So let's get started giving the listeners some challenges and some recommendations, if you don't mind. So how about a fitness challenge for everybody listening today?
Fitness challenge. Well, I'm not a big runner, even though I've come to enjoy running sort of midway through my early military career. So I tend to mix things up, but like long duration challenges. So something that really sort of breaks you down. Big fan of odd objects and sandbags. So if you combine those together and can find a suitable hill, and again, you can supplement any body weight or sandbag exercise in this, run to the top of the hill with a sandbag, do the prescribed exercise, come down, and then work it as either an AMRAP or some sort of ladder that is really going to stress you both physically and to some extent mentally.
I like that. Anytime that there's some sort of object that you have to carry and a hill, it's already pretty bad. So that's a good challenge right there.
Yeah, my neighbors have seen me running around with sandbags, weighted backpacks, even sledgehammers. So occasionally I wonder why some of my neighbors avoid me, and others are intrigued and will come out and say, "What the hell are you doing?" So It's either one or the other reaction.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a neighbor, and behind his house, so I kind of live in the mountains, but most of them have like too many trees for like a real hill run. But behind his house, I don't know why he had done it. Like it's basically straight vertical, but he had cleared out this probably like 30 meters pathway across all the way up to the top. And I finally got around, like, we don't know each other that well, but we stopped at the mailboxes the other day. And I basically asked permission if it's okay for me to do hill runs on his property. And he gave me the weirdest look like, yeah, dude, knock yourself out. That's fine, whenever you want. So he thinks I'm pretty odd and unusual, but at least you understand where I'm coming from.
There you go. Like minds.
All right, man. Mental toughness challenge. How about that?
So I know I touched on it to some extent with the physical challenge, and I think you can put yourself under like mental agility and stress testing in anything that you do, whether that's a physical fitness type challenge, whether it's a charitable walk, run, whatever it may be, or something that you do at work. I think one of my faults is that sometimes I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and I tend to sort of beat myself up if things are not going as planned, and that's maybe something that's gotten worse as I've gotten older. So it's taught me to be a lot more creative and flexible. And I know those are sort of attributes that I've picked up in my military career and certainly within special forces. So now I look at, well, how can I continue to sharpen that blade and build upon it? And I look to try and break things down into smaller segments. And whatever it may be, just get comfortable with doing uncomfortable things. Like I said, that could be a physical challenge. That could be tolerating heat or cold. It could be I'm naturally an introvert. And obviously going into special forces was great for me because I didn't really have to speak to anyone outside of work. But when it comes to the business world, and if you're going to survive, let alone thrive within a business setting, you've got to interact with colleagues and obviously customers and go out there and get new business, even though I'm not in a sales role. Speaking to people in that sense is not natural to me. So I've had to go through that process to toughen myself up for when someone shuts you down or says no. So not any one exercise, but trying to look at anything that makes you uncomfortable in a way that, how can I break this down and how can I tackle this in smaller increments that is perhaps more digestible, easier to swallow, and with that objective, that aim to complete, to get the sale, whatever it may be at the end. And that is something that you do through discipline and, again, being a bit more mentally resilient rather than just mentally tough.
I love that, man. And yeah, I'd say anytime you do find those situations, it's typically that you're on the right path, right? If it's starting to be difficult or make you uncomfortable, not only push your way through it, but that might be the direction you need to head because you're not wanting to. It's normally a good indicator. So I love that advice.
Yeah.
I mean, how about a book recommendation? Now, this could be maybe something that you've read that, once upon a time that impacted your life, or maybe something currently you're reading?
So obviously, a lot of the stuff that I'm reading now is related to perhaps the reason behind the podcast. So a lot of notes and stories of former ocean rowers, those that have rowed across an ocean or the Atlantic in the past. But I'm not one really to read a lot of fiction, if any fiction at all. I can't remember the last time I actually read a fiction book. And when looking at book recommendations that others may find stimulating, I would say whether you're someone that's into guns or not, I think it was a New York bestseller, or New York Times bestseller, should I say. But the book Glock, The Rise of the American Gun, or the America's Gun, by Paul Barrett. I think that, again, touches on a lot of what I've been used to in my career, but especially the sort of process behind the design of the gun, and it's the business part of it, and how and why it became such a popular weapon system, not just in the Americas but worldwide. So I think that's a good read, whether you're someone that has a gun, owns a gun, has fired a gun or not. It's a good business book to some extent.
Okay, awesome. I'll check it out. All right, man. Well, I appreciate the challenges and the book recommendations. So how about you kind of give us a breakdown, maybe a little bit of your background, history, and also leading up to what you have coming up?
Certainly. So obviously you can tell I'm not from around these parts. I'm a resident in Atlanta, but transplanted here from the UK. Grew up in a family that's used to travel. My father owned a coach and travel business, so from a very early age, travel was very, very much part of my life. Was very fortunate to travel kind of all over Europe with my father during various school holidays and as a family as we were growing up. I think that's been pretty instilled in me, and who I am as a character. I joined the military when I was 18, spent 12 years, first in the Marines, and then progressed on into the Special Boat Service, so kind of the UK equivalent of your SEALs. Worked in various different environments, first Gulf War, a number of different roles within the service, and then came out pre 9/11. So I came out in March of that year when the world wasn't as crazy, not knowing kind of what I wanted to do. I was very fortunate with my military service that I progressed through the ranks fairly quickly. I was the third youngest to pass SBS course at the time. But I hit that natural ceiling with a small unit, and I wasn't going to get promoted any quicker because of the way the pyramid narrows towards the top. So still being young enough, I decided to leave and pursue a second career, not knowing what that was going to be. At the time, not a great deal of call for underwater knife fighting gurus. So I naturally sort of migrated into security work, but I knew that I wasn't one for kind of stood in front of an elevator watching guard over some high net worth individual. I needed something that was more mentally stimulating. So given my background, I started doing some counter piracy work in West Africa and the Malacca Straits. Was very successful at that, and got asked to be sort of a project lead on a demining operation on the Iran-Iraq border. Obviously, when 9/11 happened and the jets went into Afghanistan, the world changed. A couple of those projects that I was due to go out onto became a distant memory, and I'm now sort of scratching around, what am I going to do next? Early on in that sort of transition, I looked after a bunch of journalists from the BBC doing an investigative journalist piece in Brazil, going after the illegal logging trade and the mahogany mafia. So I kind of enjoyed that, working with the team, great bunch of people. So I got a phone call saying, hey, you've looked after journalists before. Do you want to go to Afghanistan? And I mean, I've always wanted to go there. Not really interested in what was going on, but yes, it was a vehicle to get me there, and it was a place I sort of wanted to go and cross off the list, and the work was interesting. So 10 days later, I found myself in Afghanistan, again looking after a load of journalists, and we were very fortunate. We were in that lull between the fall of the Taliban and the rise of the sort of insurgency, and more importantly, the threat from IEDs and so forth. So we had a good amount of freedom to explore the country, pursue various stories. And I mentioned why that's so important, because during my time there, I was sort of instrumental in recovering what turned out to be bin Laden's video library. And that's what brought me to Atlanta. Fast forward a little bit, we were looking at how CNN was going to look at covering the Second Gulf War. And because of my introduction to them at a very senior level, they thought, well, perhaps we could second Tim to come train us and set up all of our field safety needs for the teams that we're going to put in to cover the war. So that's what my job was. Initially, it was going to be a 3 to 6 month secondment. It turned out to be about 2.5 years. I met my wife here, and we eventually put down roots in 2006, and I've been here ever since. So kind of the bulk of what I've done over the last 14 years is still kind of travel related, in support of mainstream journalists covering anything from conflicts to natural disasters, investigative pieces, anything that could potentially put them in harm's way. My role was to basically keep them safe and build out all the contingencies to keep them safe, get the story, train, and sort of mentor the journalists so they could focus on the news gathering piece and not worry so much about the safety aspect. About 2 years ago, transitioned back into travel risk management, company I work for now, world leader in basically keeping other people safe all around the world. We have big multinationals, engineering firms, through to large media and entertainment companies, even governments that rely on our services to keep them safe. And here in Atlanta, and that's sort of my story to date.
That's pretty incredible, man. That's quite an amazing career you've had. And one thing I wanted to touch on is you obviously are very passionate about servicemen and women, right? I mean, that's a big part of, we haven't really mentioned rowing yet, but that's a big part of why you're planning to row across the Atlantic. And what are you trying to, bring awareness to, and how did that come about?
Yeah. So if we go back about 2 years, I think everyone, or most people, will remember the viral video cause that was going around at the time was 22 push-ups for 22 days. Very much like the Ice Bucket Challenge. The idea was to try and draw attention and raise support for, at the time, 22 veterans taking their own lives through primarily PTSD. But as we've come to learn, there are many other mental health issues, the effects of traumatic brain injuries and so forth, just alienation and kind of desperation to some extent. So that was going on. I got to do my 22 for 22. And it was around about that time I reconnected with an old military buddy of mine back in the UK through social media. We got chatting, reminiscing about the good old days, and we were actually on the core boxing squad together. And it was about 6 weeks later or so, I found out that he took his life, and he was suffering pretty badly from PTSD. And even though we hadn't been close for 25 plus years, it hit home a little bit closer than one would have thought. And I felt that I needed to do more, given the fact that I was a veteran. And I felt that while very honorable, and it's still going on to some extent today, the whole push-up challenge thing didn't have a great deal of impact. And apologies for those that set that up. I'm not taking anything away. It's brought me to where I am. So me and a group of friends, we thought, well, we need to do more. And we tried to create more of a production around the cause, and we were going to draw in some local servicemen and airmen, use of drones, and make this big whole production. We even had one of the guys doing push-ups with the sea lions in the Georgia Aquarium, and we were going to cut this all together, and hopefully it was going to get a little bit more traction. Well, living in the south during the spring, a weather event occurred, and the filming sort of got postponed, and people just got busy with life. So they went about what they were doing, and it was one of those itches that I just couldn't scratch. I felt that I still wanted to do more. I couldn't leave it alone. And it was about that time, another friend of mine happened to be rowing across the Atlantic from mainland Europe to mainland Latin America as a team of 6 for a children's charity in the UK. So doing a little bit of research on that, I came across the Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge, which is the race that I'm entered to participate in, and saw that not only was it an incredibly well-run and safe race, and talking relative terms when you're going out on the Atlantic Ocean in a little 20-foot boat by yourself, it's an incredible platform for charitable fundraising and bringing some much needed attention to charitable causes. So I thought, this is great. This is what I want to do. It's a suitable challenge to meet a cause that you quite rightly pointed out that I am very passionate about, and I feel that has slipped back into the shadows to some extent, even though the numbers have improved. There are other studies going on into the causes and perhaps some of the remedies and the outlets. But what I want to do is bring the conversation back out into the sunlight, make it more of a conversation, dispel a lot of the stigma around mental health in general, not just veteran mental health, but obviously veterans are closer to my heart than most. And then allow other groups that are equally in the same space, doing good stuff, start to connect with each other, so we can sort of force multiply and leverage the success that one group is doing with another, and get the help that people are willing to provide and can provide to those that really need it.
Now tell us a little bit more about the race itself.
So it's a race now that my race that happens later this year. Actually, it's due to start 12th of December. It's its 21st year. There's obviously been independent crossings of the Atlantic as well as other oceans long before this. But this is an actual race of 3,000 nautical miles. So you're looking at around about 3,200 statute miles, regular miles, 4,500 kilometers, depending on how you like to slice and dice your distances. Starts in La Gomera in the Canary Islands, which is a small cluster of Spanish islands, sort of off the northwest corner of Africa. And it finishes in Antigua, obviously in the Caribbean. It is a self-supported race, so you can't have any outside assistance other than, or outside material assistance. So you have to start the race with an approved boat, a certain amount of race required equipment, training, experience on that boat, and enough food and water to get you to the other end safely. So it can be done as a solo, which I've chosen to do that, or you can do it as a team of 2, 3, 4, and there's even 5-person teams that attempt it as well. So you have your team class, and then you can race it either as a pure boat, which is a certain style of ocean rowing boat, sort of modeled off the original races, or a concept boat, which is the boat that I've chosen, which is a little bit more sleek, takes advantage of some of the following seas, following weather. And obviously with this route, we make best use of the trade winds when they're favorable. And hopefully that will help us get across in a timely sort of fashion. I'm aiming for a crossing of about 50 days or less.
Wow.
The race that just finished earlier this year, the weather was almost perfect in the sense that you had strong, favorable following seas and wind, literally almost a straight line from La Gomera to Antigua, which meant all of the world records were broken. So the leading 4-person team, or the boat that won it, came in 29 days. The first solo rower that was 4th overall came in 30 days, smashing the solo record by 5 days.
Wow.
And the second solo rower after that person came in 44 days. So he's about 1,000 miles behind the guy that won it. So that kind of puts you in perspective. And I think the last boat came in 66 days. So you can see the difference between 29 days and 66 days when things go well, versus when you get some years where the weather is a little bit more against you and you could be out there a little bit longer.
That's insane. I mean, what is that rowing like, depending on your, whether you're setting a world record or going for 50 days, you're rowing 2 to 3 marathons per day, right?
So if you take Mark Slatts, who won this year's solo class, I think on one occasion he rowed for, I think, maybe 24 hours, close to 24 hours, and I think he did 104 miles in one day.
Wow.
On average, he was around about probably 70, 80 miles a day was his average that he was sort of clocking up. And to put that into perspective, you've got to realize that he's doing that by himself. Any of the other teams, whether you're a pair or a 4-person team, they will generally be working a 2-on, 2-off routine. But there's always someone on the oars. That means that there's always forward propulsion. You're always closing the distance down between you and Antigua. As a solo rower, as soon as you stop to fix some food,
right,
have a bio break, take some much needed rest, then if the weather's against you, then you're not closing that distance down. So that's where the added challenge comes in.
So let me ask a few questions just about, since I don't know a lot about rowing, and especially not about rowing in a distance or a race like this, a few things come to mind. First, so sleeping, like how much on average do you plan to sleep? And I mean, do you have like I don't feel like it would work in the Atlantic, like an anchor. Like how do you just like, stop and like chill to take a break? Like especially if the weather's getting kind of crazy.
Yeah, an anchor on an ocean rowing boat is just dead weight. You wouldn't be able to carry enough rope for it to
right
and do anything. So, but you do carry what they call a sea anchor or a power anchor. And if you picture a large parachute, you can throw this into the water and it's on a long length of line. And obviously that deploys and acts like a huge parachute in the water, holding the boat against the body of water. It is the wind that affects these boats more than the actual currents. Okay. So if you're got the wind in your face, because obviously you're rowing backwards or you're traveling backwards, then you stop rowing. The wind is actually still assisting you in pushing you to your destination. But let's say a storm has built up and you've got wind coming against you, and actually pushing you backwards back to the start line. What you would do is obviously you row until you're either exhausted or you're not making any forward headway, and then you choose to deploy your power anchor, and that would obviously slow any push backwards. And And that's sort of what it's there for. That's its main reason. It helps stabilize the boat to some extent, depending on how you've got it set up. And the same with, you have a smaller drogue, sea drogue, that can be used in the same fashion, or you can actually trail that if the wind is too strong and you have large waves, you don't want to obviously tip over end to end. You can have it to sort of slow the progress down as well. So those are your two means really to try and stop the boat from getting blown too far off course. And they're fairly vital to pieces of equipment of all of the equipment on board.
And when you stop, are you taking like a 3-hour rest, 5-hour? Like, what are your plans for that?
So this all comes down to your own sort of race strategy, and it like I said, this is now its 21st year in its existence. It's a very good community. So past, present, and sort of future rowers all exchange information based on how their crossing was like, what a typical crossing it's like. Some people have done this race 2 or 3 times, or have rowed the Atlantic more than once. So you get a lot of good information from them. And there are, if you take your 3,000 miles, some people will divide it up into 3 distinct areas. As you come out of La Gomera and off the north part of Africa, referred to as the acceleration zone, where the weather can be a little bit turbulent. So the idea is to try and break out of that as quickly as possible to get into the trade winds. So you may go hard and aggressive for the first portion, let's say the first 1,000 miles. And so you may have a more aggressive routine. That might be, if you're in a team, that might mean you're rowing 3 people up, 1 person off, and you rotate round based on what you feel is acceptable. As a solo rower, you don't have that luxury. So taking some advice from the 2015 race winner, his advice to me was, well, sleep when you need to sleep, eat when you need to eat, and just constantly rehydrate. And that's where a lot of the discipline comes in, because some people will be consuming anywhere between 8 and 12,000 calories a day.
Wow.
Because of the energy output. And obviously, early on in the race, you want to try and maintain a degree of freshness, because if you can get out in front or take a significant lead, hopefully you will keep that as you get further on into the race, because invariably things will perhaps break, things will start to malfunction, you're going to start to get sleep deprived, so your performance is going to drop off fairly quickly. You're going to develop rashes and salt sores and blisters and repetitive strain injuries and all those sort of things that come with rowing anywhere between 14 and 18 hours a day.
That's insane. And what I do have a few more curious questions, just because I've done a lot of events myself, obviously never one to this caliber. So what are you going to do during? Like, are you going to listen to audiobooks, maybe my entire podcast? Like, what are you going to be doing? Just the ocean and the wind. What are you going to be doing during the rowing?
Yeah, so you're in a little 22 foot boat and the Atlantic is very seldom is it calm. It's always moving. So you're like lost within the waves, lost within the sort of clutter. So there's not much to look at once you get out, other than the stars at night, which I've been told are pretty dramatic. So you're going to look at your compass, the rear cabin hull of your boat, perhaps your feet, the occasional flying fish, anything to break up the monotony. So, yeah, I intend to, and in fact, I've already started writing down songs that I'll put on a playlist. Audiobooks would be a great suggestion. Anything that is going to again, occupy the mind, but to get something that provide a stimulus for the mind as well. So all of that will be loaded onto various MP3 players of one sort or another, and hopefully that will keep me entertained as we come across. And again, as a solo rower, when I'm not rowing, got to be very efficient in terms of food preparation, personal hygiene, and maintenance, trying to make sure that things don't get to the point that they break on the boat. So there's a bit of preventive maintenance that will need to be factored in. And I'm sure there'll be a degree of sort of MacGyvering one piece of equipment or not, to ensure that I get to the end. So there's going to be many little jobs that need to be done. But when I'm on the oars, music and audiobooks, I think it's going to occupy a lot of the time of that repetitive row your boat.
And what's your training look like right now?
So at the moment, I'm sort of transitioning. I did partake in the CrossFit Open. So I'm transitioning out of that now for the next 6 weeks or so, moving to sort of a 3-day WOD program, 2 days of sort of Olympic lifting, and then a makeup day where I'll do more long-term endurance stuff. Rowing whenever I can. Whenever there's an opportunity to supplement rowing into a WOD as opposed to anything else, I'll try and do that. Obviously, I'm sponsored by Water Rower, so I have a rower here at home that I try to spend more time on than my family would perhaps like. And then a lot of accessory work to start injury proofing myself. And then I think once we get to that 6-month countdown, then it may change again. Maintain a couple of WODs, circuit training, more for that mental resilience again, because again, from the winner of the 2015 race, he said, do stuff that beats you up. And this is coming from a guy that grew up on the water. His whole family is involved in boat building. He's rowed his entire life. And he said, in preparation to this race, some people will think that they've got to row 2 million miles, but it won't translate to ocean rowing, because it's not like you're on a flat erg or on a flat piece of water. The boat's always moving. You have one oar in, one oar out. It's more of a frustration perhaps for a regular, like Olympic type rower. Plus the distance is very different. You have to have good rowing technique. So I try to film much of my erg sessions. I send them to a friend of mine who happens to be a rowing coach, and he corrects my form and gives me pointers and exercises that I need to do. So I've been told when you get to La Gomera at the end of November, just make sure that you're injury free, right? That you're used to kind of rowing and you're ready to kind of just start the race without any sort of niggle here, having perhaps overtrained or tweaked something, and you're obviously well fed, because most people will drop anywhere between 10 and 15% of their body weight during the crossing.
That's crazy. Well, one thing that comes to mind, we just had him on the podcast a few weeks ago. Alex Hutchinson, he wrote the book Endure. Have you read that?
I haven't, but perhaps I should add that to my reading list.
Yeah, he really talks about the limits of human endurance, but there are a lot of stories in there about similar things that you're doing. But these long trek type things, people going to the South Pole and cyclists doing these crazy races and all these things, and he really breaks down not just what's going on physiologically, but what's going on psychologically. And where the mind breaks down and what's the science behind it and all these things. So it might be a really interesting book for you to check out. A lot of what you're talking about and just the race in general reminds me a lot about what he wrote in that book.
Definitely, yeah. I'll check that out. Thanks.
Yeah, well, it's been awesome chatting with you, but I want to make sure we get to the quick fire questions of the show. So are you ready?
Okay, far away.
All right, what's the hardest workout you've ever done?
Oh, anything with a lot of burpees in.
Yep, that'll do it.
I'm tall and I just don't like having to get up and down with a little bit of a hop in the middle.
Well, the tall helps with the rowing, so good pick there. So, in your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
Long, tedious. I just don't like this sort of stuff where you've got to really push yourself beyond an acceptable level of comfort.
And if you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
So I go back and forth on this. It's either a sandbag or a kettlebell. But I think in terms of versatility, when I travel, I'll go with a sandbag.
Awesome. All right, now the question of the show, what is the best advice you have for becoming a better human? This is 100% open-ended.
Ooh, ask questions. Yeah, don't think you know it all. Just keep asking questions. Even when you've got where you may think that you're at the top of your game, you still got probably a ton more that you can learn from a lot of others because things change, sports change, business changes, everything changes. So you should always be asking questions.
Love it. All right, Tim. I'm sure people are going to want to check out what you're doing, maybe support the cause. So what's the best place for people to learn more about you and what you're doing?
I think you can get to everything, the backstory, and then obviously all our social media, and more importantly, those that can and want to donate. The website, it's www.tamethecraken.org. And from there, you'll see the backstory, why I've named the boat the Kraken, and obviously it links with my sort of synopsis of PTSD and as having to wrestle with this dark monster that wants to take you somewhere that you don't want to go. Sponsorship opportunities, and then obviously links to our various social media. So we're all over Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So just look for us, Tame the Kraken, and you should be able to find us in any one of those locations.
Awesome. And we'll link to all that in the show notes. Well, Tim, it's been awesome having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jared. Been great.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.